Hello and welcome to our program. I'm Takis Manetas. Today I have Father Themis Adamopoulos, who is an archimandrite with the Greek Orthodox Church and with a mission in West Africa. He has a very interesting story to tell us. Father Themi, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me here, Taki. Pleasure is mine.
Yes, it's good for us to know who you are.
Yes, sir.
And about your background.
Yes, sir.
In your childhood. How did you grow up and where were you born and so on?
Sure. Well, I am a product of the immigration movement that Australia was experiencing in the 50s and 60s. And we came to Australia as I was a very young boy, but we were Greeks from Egypt, not from Greece, but from Egypt, which is slightly different. There are some differences between the two. And we were not economic immigrants as many were from the Mediterranean. We were actually political immigrants in the sense that we were running away, or not running away so much as avoiding the Egyptian rise of nationalism.
Which year was that?
In the late 50s. So what was happening is, up to a certain time, Egypt was under King Farouk.
Yes.
And it was open for Europeans. Egypt did not have any discrimination against Europeans. Indeed, they were very welcome because particularly the Greeks had a population of 300,000 in Alexandria. Yes. And they had created modern Alexandria, the architecture, the shops, the culture, the patriarchate of Alexandria. It was full of Greekness. Even the famous poet that was from Alexandria, Gavafis. But what happened when I was a child was the rise of Arab nationalism, the beginning of what we see today, where the Arab consciousness began to rise, the Islamic consciousness began to rise. And we felt as Europeans that it was becoming difficult for us. And we could see the writing on the wall, at least my parents could see the writing on the wall. And while Greeks were tolerated, they could see that at some point even the Greeks would be a target for this new Arab nationalism. So they wrote to two embassies, one the Australian embassy in Cairo for immigration to Australia, and to Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, of all places. I had an auntie in Rio de Janeiro and an auntie in Melbourne, right, from Egypt. Yes. They had left some time before. So my father wrote to the both embassies in Cairo. The Australian High Commission, or the Australian Embassy, responded within 3 weeks, affirmatively, whereas the Brazilian Embassy seemed to be under some kind of waiting period, or too much siesta or something, I don't know what. They didn't respond until sometime much, much later than the Australian Embassy. So my father concluded that the Australian government is more efficient than the Brazilian government on the basis of their immediate response. So they said, we're going to Australia. It seems to be a more organized country. And so we arrived here as trying to get away from the political turmoil that was beginning to erupt in Egypt, you see. And so we began a brand new life in Australia. And it's interesting that while in Egypt we had a very comfortable life, very comfortable, nice houses, nice, everything was, we had people working for us and so forth. When we arrived here, we actually went down economically.
You've lost the servants.
We lost many things. We lost the marble floors
and everything.
Yes. So we were not economic migrants, you see. My father was a chemist, my mother was a teacher and so forth. So what happened was that we went to St. Albans. Now, at that time in Melbourne, St. Albans was a very there were hardly any made roads.
Yes, yes.
It was all mud.
That's right. Yes,
absolute mud.
Yeah.
And my parents were the most depressed people in the world for the first 6 or 7 months.
Yes.
And my mother would cry every day.
Can I ask you, were you allowed to take any money out, or
my parents did manage to get some money out?
They did, because most of those who left Egypt, they left behind everything.
Oh, well, you live behind most of the things, but you could take money.
You could take money.
So they brought money, and that helped a lot.
Yes.
You know, that helped a lot.
Yes.
Right. So we were not beggars. You know. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But still, the challenge that my mother and father faced was the recognition of their education here.
Yes.
For my mother to be a teacher, she had to be recognized here. My father to be a chemist, he had to be recognized with an Australian degree or an Australian equivalent. So for the first 6 or 7 months before they were able to be recognized, my mother worked in a factory. Rosella Jam Factory in Richmond.
Yes.
And she would cry every day. This was
Church Street.
She was a madame.
Oh, yes.
She was Madame Hélène, teaching. She had her own school in Alexandria, teaching French. Yeah. You understand? And so from being a French teacher...
Did she ever think to go back?
She would cry every day.
Yeah.
I would come back from school and my mother was in tears.
Yes.
Because of the condition of her new status as a factory worker. The same thing with my father. My father worked at Fisherman's Bend in Port Melbourne as a labourer.
Yeah.
So you can see, I was watching my parents from where they were in Egypt, with their social.
How old were you when you came?
I was 7, 8, 7
or 8. So you remember very well then.
I remember Alexandria very well.
Yeah.
I remember everything, and but I quickly adapted, to be honest. I quickly adapted and even started playing Australian football.
Oh, that's very
even though I thought it was very strange in the beginning. It looked like a watermelon.
Yes.
I thought, what is this? A piponi, in Greek.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We'll go to a break and we'll come back. Very interesting.
Yes, sir.
Friends, we're going to a break and we'll come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm talking to Father Themis Adamopoulos, who has a very interesting story. Now, you were telling me that you came here and you were pretty okay, but your parents were depressed to get on in the new life, and you started playing even football.
I started playing football and I went to St. Albans Primary School. I was wearing very strange clothes. I was wearing clothes that we would wear in Alexandria, a little bit like Lord Fauntleroy. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's like you wear your trousers up to your knees, and then you have long socks, and you have a cap and so forth. Anyway, I looked a little bit odd. I looked like some kind of a reject from the British aristocracy who had found his way to St. Albans. It just was completely...
What about your English?
It was okay because I had studied English in Alexandria.
Yeah, in Alexandria. Most of the Greeks there, they were speaking 4 and 5 and 6 languages.
Correct. They did. My parents spoke French at home rather than Greek. Imagine, yes. I still speak French, and that helps me in the mission. It helps me a lot.
Good.
Anyway, so I adapted very quickly to the Australian way of life. My parents did not. They found a struggle in the beginning. Eventually, imagine I would come home from school, my mother was crying. Every day, crying. Okay, for 6, 7 months, non-stop, right? Every day crying. But what happened was she was accepted at the University of Melbourne, and somehow they saw that she spoke perfect French, right? Yes. So she told them she was a principal in Alexandria, and so the professor at the time, Professor Jackson, he gave her a chance to do some work, and eventually she was recognized. And so from being a factory worker at Rosella in Richmond, she became a teacher at Presbyterian Ladies College.
Oh,
So she was back in
very
her
good.
element. She was
Yes,
back again
yes,
to the woman
yes.
that she was
Of
back in
course.
Alexandria.
Yes.
And my father, from being, not recognized as an industrial chemist, eventually he too was recognized, and he started working for Monsanto Chemicals. And so he was also back again to his element.
Yes,
You understand?
yes.
So they were okay now.
Yes.
My parents were okay. They were earning fairly good salaries, and we bought a house and so forth. And we were living in Williamstown. So everything became normal. I went then to Williamstown High School, and I adopted completely the Australian way of life. In some ways, I was not interested in the Greek Orthodox Church. The Greek Orthodox Church, when I was a teenager, was only for immigrants. It was not for me.
Yes.
I had now become anglicized. I had now become an Australian, and that church was for the immigrants.
What, you mean that the Australians at the time did not care about God?
There was some faith, but I went to a government school.
Yes.
And it was completely secular. There was
Yes.
no talk of God. There was no talk about Jesus or the
No
gospel.
religious instructions
nothing,
at the time?
Nothing. And that was fine with me. I didn't care because I was not a believer.
What about your parents?
My parents were believers, but again, because of the nature of their work, they would go to church on holy days.
Yes.
Easter, Christmas,
Yes.
The Virgin Mary, the 15th of...
Typical.
Orthodox.
Orthodox.
But I myself was not attracted at all to the Greek Orthodox Church. I found that the priests at the time were not really very educated, you see.
Yes.
So I didn't have much in common, and also there were not many young people. They were mostly older people.
Yes.
And they spoke Greek, and I didn't speak very good Greek. So there was no connection.
Yes.
So I just forgot about the church.
And the liturgy was
all in Greek.
chanting and in original Greek, so it was...
Yes, so there was nothing to attract me.
Yes.
So I just forgot about it. And if my parents went to church, I didn't want to go, right? And that went on all the way up to high school, all the way through high school, up to Form 6, the final year. I did very well. And I got a scholarship to go to the University of Melbourne. So I did. But what happened in the meantime, during that initial period at Melbourne University, 1964-65, a British group of musicians called the Beatles
Yes.
took the world by storm.
Yes.
Maybe not in Greece, I understand that.
No.
And not in Lebanon, I understand that. But in Australia,
Yeah, I remember that.
fever.
Yes, I do remember.
They were more popular
Yes.
than the Collingwood Football Club.
Yes.
And that's really saying something for Melbourne, right?
Yes.
And in Great Britain, in Canada, in all the Anglo countries,
Yes.
they were a sensation. Now imagine being a 17-year-old kid,
Yes.
and these people explode on the
That's
scene.
right. Yes.
And I decided right there and then that I had to be like them. I had to imitate them.
Yes.
So I was already playing the guitar. Just playing, nothing great.
Yes.
And when they arrived, I decided we must now form an Australian equivalent to the Beatles.
Oh, yeah.
You understand?
Yes, yes.
Right. So the Beatles came here. Everybody went crazy at the Southern Cross. We used to call the Southern Cross.
Yeah, I remember them. Yes.
All the street, Burke Street, was
Yes.
full of people. You couldn't, like 500,000 people turned up.
Yes.
It was unbelievable. And so to me, university compared to the Beatles sounded a little bit dull. So I told my parents, I'm dropping out for 1 year. I had a scholarship, but I decided to postpone it. And I was going to form a group just like the Beatles. You understand? And they said, Themi, what are you doing? You at university now? You need to think about your career. My father, was concerned. I said, don't worry, Dad. only 1 year. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine, you know.
Yes, yes.
So we grew our hair very long, you know, the way the Beatles grew their hair. And we were among the first people, first musicians to do that. And we assembled 4 people together, each one with different instruments.
I'm sorry to interrupt you again. We're going to have a break again. It's very interesting, and we're coming back.
Okay.
It's a very interesting story we are hearing. We're going to a break, and we're coming back. Please stay with us. Welcome back. I'm talking to Father Themi about his previous life and how he was involved with the Beatles, and he was going to start something with the Beatles. Welcome back.
Well, yes, we were imitating the Beatles in Melbourne. We were the first group to be like the Beatles with the new type of music, because up to that point the popular music was Elvis Presley and Del Shannon and people who were of a particular musical mindset. We were bringing in a new type of music, and the music that the Beatles were creating and the Rolling Stones were creating was a new wave of music, and the young people loved it. So we became so popular very quickly, very quickly. We were going on television, national television. We did records. We cut records. We had hit songs on the hit parade. We did a tour of Australia. But also, we were called to be on the same show as the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones. So they came to Australia in the late 60s, and we were to be the Australian group that was to be with them on the show. So that really gave us a very high profile. Very high profile in Australia, and so we really achieved a tremendous amount of success in terms of music. In fact, outside my house in Williamstown, we had people just camping out, just staying there, just to get autographs. And my sister would go and sell my toothbrush for $2. Yes, and she would, at night when I'm asleep, she would cut some of my hair. I didn't know that. And she would make $1 too. She was a businesswoman, you understand.
Was she younger or
older? Much younger. She would have been 4 years younger than me. So she would have been 12, 13. And she would go and sell these things to all the young fans that were camped outside the house. And she would make good money, you see. But I didn't know anything about it.
So your parents, how did they react to all that? They accepted
My parents?
It? Yes.
They were just didn't know how to react to it. They didn't understand. They didn't know. They just accepted it after a while. But anyway, look. Eventually, I decided enough is enough. You know, I didn't want to continue with this rock and roll rock star business.
How long did you go?
About 2 years. 2 years. I remember I cancelled my scholarship for 1 year, and then I cancelled another one. But I decided to go back to university. I didn't want any more to continue.
What were you studying?
I now began to study philosophy and political science. Right. So I started again in Melbourne University, now doing serious studies, which led me to Marxism, to neo-Marxism, not classical Marxism, what is known as new left, new Marxism. And I became convinced that the solutions to the problems facing the world was a Marxist application of economics, and particularly the worker, the working class people should be given more power, more money, and more authority. So, and it wasn't just joining the Labour Party. The Labour Party was considered to be a little bit too bourgeois, too middle class. It had to be more radical than that. We were looking for the revolution of the working class in Australia. And that's why we had the moratoriums, and we had the sit-downs at the universities, and we had the lockdowns, and we were of course protesting against the Vietnam War as well, because that was going on at the time. And And at the same time, being a student, trying to wear two hats at the same time, being a student, passing exams, being a political activist, and so forth. I worked during my holidays, I worked at the railway yards, trying to get the railway workers to be aware that they were being exploited by the capitalist class and so forth. At any rate, what happened to me, Taki, was that at some point, I started believing in Jesus, which was very strange, because that was the last thing in the world that in my world, that was so alien. But what happened, I'll tell you. How it happened is that the Beatles had gone to India.
Yes.
And they were telling us in their music and in their messages that through transcendental meditation and through obedience to a yogi, a guru, you would find enlightenment.
Yes.
You would find enlightenment. So I went through that journey of meditation, trying to seek this enlightenment. But all it did for me eventually was to lead me to Christ. So that's how.
How was that?
Well, I can tell you one example. When I was in the ashram, which is like where the gurus are, it's called the ashram, like a church, but of Hinduism.
Yes.
Yeah. And I joined the Hare Krishna, but I decided the Hare Krishna was not good. Not it wasn't good, it wasn't for me.
Yes.
And then I went on to this ashram, the Divine Light Mission, some guru from India, and his disciple was giving us knowledge. We had to sit down and he would come and put his finger on our forehead and we would receive knowledge, divine knowledge. When he came to me, I was wearing a cross.
Yes.
Right? But that cross for me was not a symbol of religion.
No,
it was more like a
decoration.
Led Zeppelin, a group called Black Sabbath, were wearing crosses. It was a fashion statement.
Yes.
But when he came to me, he looked at my cross and he said, "Oh, you'll have to remove that," the guru said.
Yes.
I said, "Why?" "Oh, you have to remove it." I said, "No, I'm not going to remove it." I became stubborn about it.
Yes.
Not because I believed in it, but because I wondered, why would this big guru be intimidated by a fashion statement?
Yes.
And I said, "No, I'm not going to remove it." And he said to me, "Well, you have to leave." I said, "I will leave." So I left. But that started me thinking, how come a big guru, a wise man from India, is intimidated by a little cross?
Yes.
Why?
Yes.
And that started the hard drive to start working. It started to making me think about Christianity and the power of the cross and the power of Christ. And I started reading the New Testament. And
so you got the Bible and you started reading.
I started reading the Bible day and night. I sold everything I had, gave it, to the church and that kind of thing.
Well, very interesting story. Thank you very much for coming and telling us. And then we will continue next week about the mission that you are with.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching our program and being with us. And we hope you will be with us again next week when Father Theim will continue with his story.